I'm here with brilliant retail analyst David Ian Gray, who also happens to be the owner-operator of DIG360 and my friend since we were baby entrepreneurs over 20 years ago, where we worked in the same shared office space. That was back in the 90s. Hey, I'm excited to introduce you to him as a retail analyst and as an entrepreneur running his own business. We're going to ask him some key questions about how he got started and about his business so that you can also learn and be inspired by what he's been able to accomplish in his career. Dig, I'll let you take it away. Can you tell us a little bit about DIG360 and how you got to be where you are?
Yeah, well, I'll even go back before that. So my career started, in a professional context. I was on a management kind of fast track at Imperial Oil, which had SO stations. I was at their head office. And it was a good start. I learned a lot, but it was a really large, it was the biggest company in Canada at the time, and you can get lost in the sea of that. I felt it was a bit too big, and I was a closet environmentalist in an oil and gas company in the 90s. So I kind of left and I did an MBA. And then when I came out of that, we can get into the whys and wherefores in another question, but I ended up freelancing. And I think one of the important things is we're talking about a service business, right? You and I, you have one, I have one.
Yeah.
That's really different than a product business. If you're building foods or prepared foods, or I don't know, I'm looking out the window at a barbecue. So you could be inventing barbecues and selling them or wholesaling them. That's all product based. But when it's a service, there's a difference between having a business and being a professional. So early on, I was just freelancing. I was just doing the work for a wage, basically, or a fee. But over time, I developed that into an actual business. And I bought an underperforming business after meeting Loa. We can talk about that, but I bought one and I kind of turned it around and I sold it. At the same time, I was building a consultancy, and that became a proper business by employing other people and not just kind of working on the hour. So that was my backstory in brief.
Excellent. So may I now read your very impressive bio, your professional bio? Everybody, I know David for, as I said, over 20 years, and he's one of my very good friends, but I'm also always so impressed. He's also a mentor to me in business because he started before I did. He's got a few years on me, so he's been at it for a little bit longer. I'll read you his bio so that you have a bit of a backstory and know some of the things that he's done. David Ian Gray is a recognized expert on retail and shopping trends, consistently producing high impact knowledge for how many years, Dig, would that be? Over 20 years?
I don't want to say, let's say over 20, but it's a lot over 20.
That's what I figured. With his team, David provides fresh counsel across Canada to founders, CEOs, and other executives on defining customer relevance, rethinking customer experience, and tailoring roadmaps for evolving their retail and DTC concepts. What is DTC?
A direct to consumer. So if you're an online brand selling direct without a store.
Thank you. He is widely sought for his insights and business media. David presents regularly on emerging retail trends, the role of retail in a sustainable future, the need for strategic adaptation and management of innovation, plus other topics. David is in Rethink Retail's Top 100. He's co-founded and co-hosted the pandemic podcast, The Business of Retail, and has taught senior executives with the prestigious London Business School and the next generation of talent at various Canadian business schools. So now that you know his background, we can get into the nitty-gritty of what he actually does, how he does it, and what made him want to start his own show. So Dave, what does DIG360 actually do, besides the fact that you're on TV a lot and you're being interviewed for retail trends and other things that are coming down the pipeline? Can you give us a bit more of an idea as to what you do and how?
Yeah, it's changed. Businesses should change, and it's changing. But I think the core has been, after I left Imperial Oil, I bumped in accidentally into some work with Canadian retail operators. And after a little while, I started to focus there. So the focus right off the bat has been Canadian retail executives, and it tends to be at the VP or CEO level of mostly of chains. We work a little bit with independents, but they don't have a lot of money. So we do it if we like them. That's the target audience and the work we do with them. The first, I guess, iteration of the business was really doing strategic studies for them. So doing market research, but blended with other data and taking a perspective on some problem or opportunity that they were facing and trying to bring a fresh perspective to it. And sort of in a traditional way, which back then was really written reports, with recommendations and all that sort of thing. Kind of saw the limitation in that. And so we still are a resource to those executives, but now we offer a bunch of different tools. So it could be those reports, but otherwise it might be setting up educational programs with peers outside their businesses or within their executive circle inside. There's certain processes we can bring in to help them have their own discussions as opposed to being the pure expert. We can bring some knowledge, but actually guide them into finding their own answers, like the Buddhist.
I love it.
And then we've expanded the work to include other adjacencies to retail. So what's an adjacency? So that would be like the landlords, like shopping center owners who have a vested interest in retail, but a different perspective. So we might be doing some work with them. We do a lot of work with kind of innovators that are trying to develop things that they feel are going to be useful to retail and helping them refine that. We haven't worked a lot with shippers, but it could be shippers. There's a whole ecosystem around what would be a retail business, all having to come together to make all of it work well. So we're working a lot with the city of Vancouver as they're imagining where it fits in new developments. So those are some examples.
Very cool. What made you want to do your own business dig instead of staying corporate?
Well, I think that's one of the best lessons for your students, because that would be the thing to ask them. If you're watching this, you're in class and you're thinking, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. That's a lifetime journey, but you should be thinking about the why behind it. Why behind it was, and maybe relevant to this particular year, when I did that break and I came out of that with my fresh MBA, it was a really horrific recession in Canada, like one of the worst in a couple of generations, just for a year or two. But everywhere that I was trained and suited for a really good job, they were all cutting. Like I had friends who were losing their jobs then. And so I thought I'll just tread water for a bit. So that's why I said I was taking up freelance projects and it was kind of fun. I got paid. I had freedom. When you're young and you get paid fairly decent amounts for a short period of time, it's pretty intoxicating. Much like friends I had who worked in bars, but at some point you X out on that, right? And
for sure.
that's really not, I wouldn't say that I was running a business. I was just doing freelance work, and there's a big difference. But as I learned more by doing, as I went along the path, I thought, hey, there could be an opportunity here in Canadian retail. It seemed very stagnant. Things I'd learned elsewhere seemed to be suited to it. So I thought, I kind of want to do this more properly. I incorporated and I set up my first business called Sixth Line Solutions back in the 90s, just around the time we met.
I remember that. I remember coming to your location and when you were doing focus groups and a lot of different neat research projects.
Well, there were two things. So one was doing richer advisory. So I was kind of selling tools that others had for retail, but I realized it's limited, and I was interested in how those were going to be used to create insights. I wanted to be more involved. So I kind of created my own space around doing that. And there wasn't much competition then. It also wasn't that lucrative then because most retailers just kind of did what they'd always done. They weren't really looking to change. Lesson number one, a good idea has to be at the right time, and there has to be a good case for the demand for it. I kind of went through some lean times. I did most of my billable through telcos and banks. I wasn't really targeting them, but that they had money, so you take those projects. I was doing a lot of research work, and I had an opportunity to take over what's kind of archaic now, but I don't know if your students have learned about them, but a focus group facility for doing qualitative research. It was underperforming. It was here in Vancouver, one of the biggest in Western Canada. I took on debt to get that. And then I started sinking very quickly under the monthly rent, and I had to have staff. It was underperforming, but I didn't think it was going to take as long to get built up. But I worked hard at that with a really good team. And then we turned that around, and actually was quite lucrative for about 7 years.
Wow.
And out of that, I then had the space to build out my retail consulting practice.
And thus DIG360 was born.
Yeah, so the sixth line, I was done with that facility, and I also was kind of done with the model of just doing studies. I wanted to do something else. And I realized like there's an advantage in doing a complete break from the business name. Like if people kind of think of you as one thing, then I felt like I needed to do a reinvent. And I actually paid some advisors, like some consultants, to take a fresh look because I needed objectivity. You know, you can look at something too long yourself. And so we did that, and that became DIG360 in, I don't know, about 2009. And it's still going now, but I'm already moving past that kind of as we speak into new things because I think you need to reinvent.
Things change, especially in this day and age, so quickly, especially small businesses. One of the advantages we have is we can be nimble and we can adapt rather quickly. So I would guess that as the innovation part is probably a big focus area for what you do with your clients because of how technology is moving so quickly.
I would like it to be, Loa. It should be, but the big difference for me in consultancy is 10 years ago, I could count on my two hands the number of retail specialists who advised on retail at a chain level in Canada. There's just so much of it now. Like everyone's an expert. Everyone who's kind of leaving a corporate job does a stint as a consultant. I'm going to use finger quotes because they're not really, they're just kind of doing it. They're back to what I used to do in the beginning, which was they're taking on a contract. They're not formalizing a process that they're putting together. It's so competitive now, and it's a time when retail doesn't have a lot of excess cash lying around, so they're being very, in some ways, they're not investing in their futures as much as they should. In terms of thinking of it, they're just trying to get through the next year. So
Right.
it's much tougher now. So where I'm starting to look is like, what are some other value add services? I still really enjoy working with executives, but I think there's a lot of opportunities in the educational space. For example, you've built some really interesting programs, and I think there's some of that out there. And the problem is, as you get older, you get a little too set in your ways. It takes longer to get there, and egos involved and all that sort of stuff.
Sure. Change is not easy for human beings. You mentioned that you took on some debt when you switched from Six Line over to DIG360. Was it insurmountable? I mean, obviously not because you turned it around, but how did you manage that? Because it's stressful taking on debt, especially.
So the debt came about because the focus group facility business is like a service business to other professionals. If you're doing an ad campaign and you want to have prospective customers around a table getting their reactions, a moderator and their firm will book facilities across Canada back in the day. Now more of it's online. And I saw that coming, but they still have them. But the way that works is as a owner of a facility, you spend a lot of money up front, and then the payment terms were longer than what we do in consulting. They were like 2 months. And so I got a crash course for the first time in my career on
Management.
cash flow. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I had to, and I did it like, this isn't always the best way, but a lot of people did it. You get a credit card and a business card and you leverage that or a line of credit.
Yeah.
And the way out by the time we were all done and sold off and everything, well, that paid it back down, but it was always there. But as the business succeeded, it became easier. Then there was less reliance on the credit because the business then has enough cash flow on a sustained basis that even in a dip, you've got reserves. But it takes a while to get there. And the funny thing is, it was success that created the need because suddenly we were getting business, and that's when you had to put more money out. So it's just basic stuff. Like if you're not paying attention to your accounting courses, that's probably a mistake. I know they're boring, but they're pretty important. So that was part of it. And then I was kind of done with it. But I think another lesson was I don't see myself as a good businessman. You always say I am, and I appreciate that. But I think I'm a good professional. Like I'm a really good advisor, but a business person, I've met them. Like they're out there and they're creating scalable consultancy, which means they'll have a process and maybe some tech tools. And then they train up people in all sorts of cities on how to use them and they brand that. And then everyone's trying to sell that into a target audience, but it's not dependent on the individual to provide guidance.
Right.
It's a productized surface. And I tried to do it. It's just not, that's not my wheelhouse.
You and me
I think
both.
you have to have a love for that. Like that has to be, that building that has to be the passion. And mine was always advising the client. So I made
Absolutely.
peace with that when I did that switch over and said, I'm just going to be a really good advisor. But I added a team of really high end, like top notch people that could fill in what I don't know, which is quite a lot.
Absolutely. You know quite a bit, Dig. You're my go-to whenever I have a question about anything business, entrepreneur, or especially retail related. You're the guy.
Well, like you said, I had a little running start on it and I obsessed over it. And, I study that. It's kind of the process of building up really, it's a personal brand. So the process of building that up, and you've done it really well. It just takes time and consistency, but you can't undervalue yourself. If you don't value yourself, then you can't expect others to do that. That doesn't mean you have to overcharge, but there's ways to position that where you're respecting your own time. And you have to see all of your time as inventory. It's like if you're selling socks, you've got like truckloads of socks that have to get sold. But if you're dropping boxes off the truck by mistake, out of
Absolutely.
carelessness, you're losing money. Your time is your inventory. So that's another thing I learned along the way.
Yes, that is a very good lesson for a service-based entrepreneur like we both are. My next question was, what would you do differently
Yeah, I
back then?
like that. I think it's always good to think that. So two things. One is I mentioned when I started, there was a bump in the economy, like a bad bump, a hiccup in the economy. I didn't really have a lot of mentorship then. I think if I was there mentoring someone, I would have said, you know what, you can always go out on your own and do things, but do it from a position of strength, not out of desperation. And you still could go back to Imperial Oil and you could do another couple of years there while you're waiting for the economy to turn. But I was young and very in a rush, and I hadn't gone through a cycle like that. Like I didn't know they kind of end, to be honest with you. I thought it was kind of a new normal, and I did what I instinctively thought was right. But if I was doing it again, I would have built up two things: more business acumen, where someone's paying me to do it as opposed to me having to self-fund it. I was in my career, but there was more to learn. And the other thing is banking the money. Down the road, I may not have had to have relied on and kind of tapping debt when I was building the focus group business. So that would be one. And I think the other is just I had insecurity, which came out as bad ego when I was early on in my career. So I wasn't comfortable with other really smart people being around me in the room with a client because I thought, why would they hire me if this older, more experienced guy I brought in going to be super impressive? And I wish I learned sooner that what I'm doing is I'm building a vision that everyone can play in. And if I'm not, then I'm not doing anything valuable. You have to take a chance. But my world really accelerated when I started stepping back and letting other really good people be front and center and do what they do best.
That's brilliant and not easy to do. Like you said,
No.
it's very true. We do have to check our egos as professionals, but especially as entrepreneurs, because it is really easy to get sucked into that place of feeling like we need to stand out or we're not going to win, right? So
Yeah.
it's such a good point. Taking care of the external perspective of your business and how you put together the products and services that meet the needs and the wants of the customers, but also doing an internal check of yourself in terms of how you're going to show up in front of your peers and in front of other industry professionals. So I hit the nail on the head when you said, yes, you have to have your operational environment sound, but also you need to check in on yourself, believe in yourself, and know that what you have to bring to the table is valuable. And that if you're including other people who have similar expertise or complementary expertise to what you're doing, ultimately is delivering value with your whole entire team that you have collectively brought together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you sort of touched on how you present yourself. That comes back to that idea of mentorship. And I'll say it again, like I know a lot of young people, they come out of school, they go, I want to be my own business person. You've got a lot of time to do it. Go get a job at not any old place. You got to do your research, but one of those Canada's top 50 best run companies. It doesn't even really matter the field. Like learn professionalism, learn how you show up. And the other problem is in a hybrid or even an online world, we don't get that mentorship. And you're going to go, what do you mean? Someone can answer my questions. But it's more like going to meetings with people and the conversations you have on the car on the way over, and then seeing how that more senior person handles an objection from a client. It's really lost. Like that onboarding and that early career development really is lost when it seems nice to work from home, but you're not learning what you should learn as quickly by doing that. So that my advice is to go get some really great experiences where you're learning how to be professional. I'm talking about if you want to be a consultant, or if you have an invention and you got to get it out there, well then yeah, go for it. But if you're trying to become a business professional, you can get out on your own, but there's so many people out there learning and build up a reputation first where someone's paying you some good money to do it.
That is very good point. Thank you.
Your students already know this, but when I was early on, I would go to a lot of conferences. I still do that to network because sometimes, even having a beer with someone, don't know if I'm allowed to advocate that, but having a kombucha with somebody, you have conversations like when you're on a Teams call, it's very agenda driven, especially if they've never met you. But relationships matter. So trying to get out and meet people, but it's really different. Like back then, it really was events based. And now with LinkedIn, all sorts of social that are virtual, it's a different kind of relationship. Those are differences. I don't know. Is that what you're looking for? And then more and more cats are taking over the business world.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, Skittles and I were doing an interview just before you and I jumped on. So I guess he's not quite done with what he wanted to say, but Skittles is not.
Skittles is saying that you should be wrapping this up, is what it.
I think you're right. So Dig, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring business background and your expertise and just your incredible personality, which I have had the privilege of having by my side as a good friend for many, many years.
Well, thank you.
To inspire me.
Thanks. And, like we share an interest in young people, like, developing their skills and finding their passions. So it's happy to help.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I know so will my students. And I just want to say thank you again, David, for this inspiring chat. And for those of you watching, if you would like to follow David and see all the fantastic things he's doing in business and how it's impacting the world of retail in Canada, you can find him at his website, dig360.ca. And also you can follow him on LinkedIn. And his LinkedIn profile is linkedin.com, David Ian Gray. You can find him at. Thanks again.
That's probably the best way, Loa. LinkedIn's probably the best channel.
You're fairly active on LinkedIn. Cool. Okay, thank you, my friend. I shall talk to you soon. Thanks for watching, everyone.